just so that we have ourselves on record for you guys. And yeah, Madalena, perhaps if you would like to kick off, there's a sort of formal introduction to the Catalyst 2030 Catalyzing Change Week Forum. It's a lovely video. So if you'd like to kick off with that, and then we'll start our session together.
Catalyst 2030 is a movement of social entrepreneurs and innovators embracing collective action to achieve the SDGs by the deadline of 2030. Our 1,500 members are active in 197 countries. By emphasizing collaborations, Catalyst 2030 is leveraging the power of the collective to accelerate real change in the lives of billions of people around the globe. What do our members say about Catalyst?
Catalyst 2030 is an invaluable global community of impact entrepreneurs.
Our relationship with Catalyst 2030 has really taught us the power of co-creation.
Join Catalyst 2030 and network, bond, and collaborate with our family members.
And I like the spirit of bringing change makers together to share and learn from each other.
Catalyst really understands the transformative nature of collaboration.
It's also a platform that can give us new tools and resources.
Catalyst 2030 has put my work on steroids.
But most importantly, to come up with solutions that are practical, ways where we can really make things happen, because social entrepreneurs are doers.
Are you a catalyst? Join us to achieve the SDGs.
Fantastic, thank you. It's very funny, Madeleine, watching myself on that video on the side there. Anyway, wonderful. So we have, how many of us do we have? We've got 12 of us here, and a number of us we have more joining us now. So a number of us are quite well acquainted with each other. And I think that's just wonderful. It's going to create a wonderful forum for having a conversation and just sharing about some of our experience in the learning ecosystem space, what that means, what a learning ecosystem is, how we're experiencing it, how we're seeing this concept evolving over time. And developing a little bit of a shared understanding about what we mean by the concept and the practice of learning ecosystems. So the whole session really is for us to evolve together and to think together and to reflect a little bit about our own experiences. For those in the room who are kind of fresher and newer to the rest of us that may know each other better, and we really look forward to hearing from you as well about your experiences. So just a quick intro of who is hosting and holding this session. It's myself, Robin, and then joined by some amazing colleagues from the South African context, Julie Williamson, James Donald, and Nadine Muller. And the three of us are part of an initiative taking place in the South African space to grow a learning ecosystem and really grow the conditions for a learning ecosystem to evolve, for high levels of relationality and trust to develop. It's an experimental initiative. It's really exciting to see what's been happening within it. And it's designed, hopefully, more and more as time goes along, to connect up with many of the others in our South African space who are running similar types of initiatives. And then finally, Geordie Diaz-Gibson, a dear friend and colleague. And together, Geordie and I also work in the global space on a project around learning ecosystem tools for regional and national level use. So supporting regional and national level governments in understanding what a learning ecosystem is, how learning ecosystem approaches can benefit their ability to achieve their SDG 4 goals around education, and really trying to shift our consciousness at a policy and decision-making level around the need for evolving a learning ecosystem mindset. And just briefly, just to give you a heads up as to how we'll go through today, or go through this hour that we have together. I actually had anticipated 90 minutes, so it's slightly shorter, so I'll cut some of this a little bit shorter. But essentially what we are doing now, a 5-minute quick introduction, a little bit of a check-in together. Then we're going to go into a space of just reflecting on our experiences in the South African context, on our EdEco experience. We'll do a little bit of a practical exercise together just to play and have fun and start on that very initial thinking about learning ecosystem mapping. And then talk a little bit about connection and sort of practical practice, what that means. So beyond mapping, how to attend to the levels of connection within a learning ecosystem. And then finally moving on to just thinking a bit about a global context. And as I mentioned, the NetEdu project with the learning ecosystem tool. And finally, having a period for some resonance and thinking together. And just exploring what's emerged for us. Okay, so forgive me those of you who've seen this video. Gary and Nikki, I know that you've seen it, and Nadine many times, but I do love it, as you know. So as we watch this little video, really just to look at it with, in your mind, thinking about your experiences within the education space, particularly for those of you obviously who are involved in education, and just reflecting on, as we're seeing here, the analogy of a living biome, a living biological ecosystem, how that translates so effectively into our human and relational ecosystems, and specifically in the space of education. So whoopsie, let me go back here. Also just need to share sound, because I always forget to share sound, which makes it frustrating for others. So can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear the sound, and if you can't, at least that I know.
Trees may look like solitary individuals, but the ground beneath our feet tells a different story. Trees are secretly talking, trading, and waging war on one another. They do this using a network of fungi that grow around and inside their roots. The fungi provide the trees with nutrients, and in return they receive sugars. But scientists have found this connection runs far deeper than first thought. By plugging into the fungal network, trees can share resources with each other. The system has been nicknamed the Wood Wide Web. It's thought that older trees, fondly known as mother trees, use this fungal network to supply shaded seedlings with sugars, giving them a better chance of survival. Those trees that are sick or dying may dump their resources into the network, which might then be used by healthier neighbours. Plants also use fungi to send messages to one another. If they're attacked, they can release chemical signals through their roots, which can warn their neighbours to raise their defences. But like our internet, the Wood Wide Web has its dark side too. Some orchids hack the system to steal resources from nearby trees. And other species, like the black walnut, spread toxic chemicals through the network to sabotage their rivals. Arboreal cybercrime aside, scientists are still debating why plants seem to behave in such an altruistic way. The hidden network creates a thriving community between individuals. When you're next in woodland, you might like to think of trees as part of a big superorganism, chatting and swapping information and food under your feet.
Okay. So the question is, why kind of look at a video like that in terms of thinking about our human ecosystems? Part of why I love that video is that I think it just reminds us that as human beings, we kind of often tend to externalize ourselves from the living world. But actually, so much of the way that our own systems work are very much like these biological ecosystems. And, you know, considering in a learning framework, in an education framework, this concept of what is it that lies underneath so much of the work that is manifest, whether it be through government organizations, through individual schools as entities, through not-for-profit organizations that impact on education. And those are the things that we see manifest above the surface of the earth, if you like, in terms of a wood. But actually what's happening underground, way down below a visible level, is that there is a whole relational network that that exists between these different organizations and entities, between the people within them. And most of the time that works for the positive, but there are also times, and I'm sure we've all had experiences of this, where there are some negative influences. And a learning ecosystem framework, really the fundamental concept behind it is to try and help us collectively to drop our understanding of what's happening from the manifest, the things that are obvious, and to start paying attention at a much deeper level to the relationships, the connections, the information swapping, the transference of assets and resources, the overlaying of initiatives that can take place in order to allow learning and whole human development to really thrive, and to see beyond the sort of formal structures of our education system and much deeper into the multiple different influences that play a part in influencing how education happens, how effective it is, and how much we support each other within the space. So, you know, part of the challenge of moving towards a learning ecosystem framework is really balancing the purpose with the practice. So the purpose of developing connection and relatedness and information sharing, with the practice of actually delivering on outcomes. This balance between caring for the relational and actually growth, and the growth that needs to happen for the children, particularly in our system. I choose to say for all of the human beings in our system. And then really the attention to balancing the attention to culture with the attention to capacity and delivery. And that our ability to pay good attention and care to those things fundamentally rests on one thing, which is our intent. So holding a very clear intent in a learning ecosystem framework around understanding the value of connection and understanding what our collective long-term wish for outcomes for our children and for education in our countries or in our communities is. And so on that note, I'd really like for us to just check in briefly with each other. Let me see, we have 16 of us. I do think I'll break us into breakaway rooms. And before we kick off and before we go into this discussion, thinking about learning ecosystems, just to find out who's in the room here with us, to introduce us to each other. And I'll break us into rooms of 3 or 4 each. And if you can just share with each other your name, where your feet rest, why is it that you responded to this invitation on learning ecosystems, and what are you hoping to have as an outcome from the session together. Okay, so here we go. All right, so we'll have 5 minutes in a room together with 3 of us, and just please share with each other, introduce yourselves so that it's a comfortable space for us to all remain in as we continue with the remainder of the session. Your name, where your feet rest, why you responded to the invite, and what you're hoping for in terms of an outcome from today. All right, so the rooms are all opening, and we'll see you back in 5.
Robin, would you like me to stay in the main room so you can join? And if somebody joins, I can send them to the breakout, or?
Sure, that would be great. I've made you co-host. Danielle, are you able to join a room? I'm going to move Geordie to room 1. Oh, wait. Okay, I'm going to move Daniela to room 3. There's Solomon. Review to room 5. And Sue, are you there? Sue? Okay. All right. So Madalena, if you can just move everybody else as they join. Okay, I'll go join Solomon. Hi, Solomon. How are you? Record again.
This meeting is being
Fantastic. So welcome back, everybody. Nice to see a couple of additional faces that have joined us. Christina, Amy, another couple of different faces. And I hope that you enjoyed that opportunity to just chat with each other briefly. So for those who've just joined, we're going to go through sort of 3 phases in this session today. A little bit of discussion about a project that's being undertaken in the South African context, a little bit of a practical exercise. So I'm just giving you forewarning now. If you can make sure that you've got a pen and paper nearby and handy for when we get to the practical exercise just now. If you haven't got one, just grab one quickly. And then the last section is talking from a global perspective, looking at a global approach to regional and learning ecosystem tools to support governments and policymakers in thinking about education from a learning ecosystem perspective. Okay, whoops. All right, so what I'd like to do quickly now is invite some of my colleagues just to reflect a little on an initiative that's been undertaken in South Africa to foster the conditions for a highly relational space within which a learning ecosystem could really thrive and develop, and we could connect with each other beyond projects at a relational level, building trust across our learning ecosystem, across multiple actors within the education space in the country, and start to see what emerges at a practical level if we pay good, strong attention to the conditions necessary for a learning ecosystem to really become strong. So James, what I'd love to ask is for you just to give a little bit of context about the work of eCubed. eCubed is the organization that is supporting the evolution of this EdEco learning ecosystem initiative. And it's been an incredible organization in supporting that because they really have been willing to undertake a highly experimental process where we are not looking at doing project-based education work. We are not looking at specific deliverables around education outcomes or the delivery of literacy programs, the delivery of maths programs. What we're really looking is at creating a safe space and a consistent space for connecting a multiplicity of actors within the South African education landscape in conversation, connecting them, creating space to think together, creating space to address and think through in partnership some of the challenges that we are facing, learning how to listen to each other and to the system well, and learning how to pay attention to what is emerging from within the South African landscape. And, really bringing people from sectors that don't often have an opportunity to engage in this way together. So we have people who are part of this initiative from government. We have people from our Department of Basic Education. We have a lot of people from the not-for-profit NGO, social sector. We have some people from the union space. We have a couple of people from the funding community, and it's been a really incredible, now coming up for 18 months to 2 years, practical experiment in building relationship. I'd love, James, for you just to give the context of eCubed and why eCubed is interested in supporting this kind of work before we go into the specifics of the EdEco experiment.
Yeah. Pleasure. No, thank you so much. Is the sound okay? I'm we have a bit of a co-working space. So I'm in one of their fancy rooms. I'm not hiding in the corner. I feel like I'm in my kid's bedroom next to a curtain. So lovely to meet you all, and so excited to learn a bit more about how the Catalyst program works. It was so exciting to see all the different pieces of conversations you could all be part of, looking at that long list of opportunities. Thank you for choosing this one. So I think, most of you would relate either as parents or, perhaps even as adults who are trying to figure out their sort of place in the world. There's lots of anxiety around what should young people have, and what kind of support do they need to prepare themselves for the future, and what will that future look like? It doesn't matter if it's a wealthy family or an under-resourced one. Nobody is quite sure what the future of work is going to look like. And at the same time, most of us are quite disillusioned with our experiences of formal education, either as children ourselves or, in schools. And, there's a rich history of attempts to make education more holistic, more about identity, meaning, and purpose. And it's so interesting that the science of learning, which is becoming more, led by a lot of work in the US, but it's becoming, more mainstream. This idea that social and emotional learning are really not separate to, or there aren't necessarily trade-offs between that kind of learning and academic outcomes. So there's this real almost moment where the science is starting to argue things that I think many cultures and individuals have known for a long time, that really young people, if given the right combination of pressure and support, challenge and support is a better word, will grow to become better versions of themselves. And whether it's a traditional sort of cultural coming of age process that's authentically delivered, or whether it's a private school that's well resourced, or whether it's a public school with teachers that care, caring adults that for whatever reason know how to create a good space for young people, they really are doing the same thing that the science says we should all do. But of course, education reform at a government system is far more complicated than that. So we are a program of South Africa's Department of Basic Education. We are structured as a nonprofit company so we can raise money independently and operate a bit like an innovation unit. But we really sit with the Director General within the Department of Basic Education. And we came out of an initiative that kicked off in 2018, but the research started way back in 2014 around a way to pilot compulsory entrepreneurship education in schools. And it came out of South Africa has a workforce development. It's called the Human Resources Development Council. It sort of sits across the Department of Labor and higher education and basic education, our school system. And it did this very comprehensive report led by the Deputy President as far back as 2014. South Africa has the highest youth unemployment rate in the world, and it's getting worse. There's some bright spots around government-funded tertiary education, but very, very few learners from government schools, particularly under-resourced ones, are able to get into universities. And even those that do go to good universities are seldom able to convert those experiences into graduation and into employment. I mean, you guys know all those backgrounds. So the program took a direction guided by governments to be very integrated into what teachers are already doing. So instead of making an additional subject, what we do is we support teachers to learn how to use project-based learning in their day-to-day work at school. And our national curriculum lends itself quite nicely for that, because there is an expectation that in the third term every year, teachers in every subject from grade K or grade R all the way to grade 12 give learners a chance to do what's called a school-based assessment, a mark that isn't out of a test. And so it's often a project. So what we do is we write projects to help teachers learn how to deliver a real learner-centered experience. And then we work closely with universities, other organizations around trying to measure competencies that we currently kind of bucket together in what we call an entrepreneurial way of being, call them 21st century skills or social emotional learning, whatever that might be. how do we find ways to measure competencies of learners where they're at, to help them learn themselves and to help the adults who are supporting them learn more. So it's a really powerful place to be within the Department of Education, but it's quite complex. And so the relationships we're helping to build in the ecosystem are really, really important for this project to be successful. So there's a lot there, Robin, and hopefully the rest will come out as we chat, but I hope that was helpful.
Fantastic. Thank you, James. So yes, I think, really primarily the takeaway there is that we all are aware of the complexity of what needs to be achieved in the space of education. Madeleine, I don't know if you can just de-spotlight James for me, because I can't do it. And what needs to be done is huge, enormous, and very ambitious, and we're all quite conscious of it. Government is conscious of it at their level, and yet we remain so tremendously siloed in our operations, and we keep trying to network, and we keep trying to kind of bring in additional organizations to work together, and it proves extremely difficult. And so because for the goals of the E-cubed mandate within our South African Department of Education, what is necessary is not a single project, it's actually a coalition of projects, and it's a coalition of working together across multiple different stakeholders, both those within the education, the formal education system, and those without the formal education system, so who lie outside, whether they are ICT providers or digital education companies, or whether they provide social and emotional support and care to learners, whether they are healthcare providers that work within a school format. It's clear that what's necessary in order to achieve the very ambitious goals of the E-cubed project is not a single well-designed project, but rather a highly connected multiplicity of stakeholders working together collectively. This is what allowed for the impetus to be put into place to develop this EdEco initiative. And so what we've done in terms of the EdEco initiative is to really start to pay attention to the fundamentals. So to look not at the project-based outcomes, but to look at what is the intention for what we are doing. And there's this beautiful phrase which comes out of the Theory U Presencing Institute space around the fact that the success of an intervention lies in the interior condition of the intervener. And so really paying attention to what is it that we are hoping to achieve, and not just rushing forward into projects, but paying attention to what are the conditions underneath, what is the relationality that's present. And what we've added to that is this concept that beyond the success of the intervention being within the orbit of the intervener's interior condition, that the power of this process really starts to emerge when you engage deeply with the gifts of the participants in the process, and when you pay attention to making space for their genuine presence. And so what our hopes and goals in running this initiative have been is to cultivate fertile ground to support the conditions for connection, the establishment of and deepening of relationship and trust within the South African education space and beyond the South African education space. It's not to build relationship for the sake of work or project, but rather to engage in dialogue, co-thinking together, natural collaborations that emerge, remaining in connection, remaining in conversation in order to allow for our relationships to deepen. And what we are starting to see is that when we do that, there is a natural emergence of projects together that starts to happen. And the point of the work that we might do together is not for the work's sake. So we don't develop relationships for work, but rather we work together in order to generate further resilience within our relationships. So it's a subtle shift in focus. So much of our work in education relates on how do we get people to work with us to achieve what we need to have as an outcome, or what we want to have as an outcome. Whereas this work is, how do we pay attention to the relationships to such a degree that the work really reinforces the strength of the relationships, and we can cope with when things go wrong. So if a project doesn't go right, we don't blame the relationship. We use it as a learning opportunity to strengthen the relationship. And so the attitude, approach, and culture that we're bringing to this project really is one of invitation, inspiration, the development of agency and ownership, motivation, co-creation, and ultimately a humanization of the work that we are doing together. And what we are hoping to do over time, we started 1.5 years ago, simply with convening. So convening a group of stakeholders and then consistently holding space to connect them. And what we are hoping and what we are starting to see emerge is these natural collaborations, moving towards co-creative capacity, so that instead of just doing work on each other's projects or doing work where things naturally merge, we're actually starting to collectively attend to what is needed within the education system and co-create solutions to answer those needs, and really move further and further towards a deepening of our collective insight and a humanization of the work that we are doing together. And our belief is that if we as sort of system actors start to hold that approach and that intention for our education space, that will transmit to the learners in our system, that instead of being seen as projects, instead of being seen as outcomes, instead of being seen as the holders of matric results or school leavers results, we start to really see them in a very human way. And ultimately, what we are hoping to do is over time, grow the capacity to develop a thriving learning ecosystem for the country. And so the way that we are hoping to see this initiative develop is to really move from an innovation, something that's new, something that's a bit ambitious, it's a bit out of the box, through to something that's an initiative, it's got a bit of momentum. And ultimately what we would like to see is that there is increasing capacity within the system, not just in the work that we particularly are doing with EdEco, but that there's almost a diffusion of this relational capacity into the system, so that we start to see a movement around the humanization of education developing, moving towards a co-owned culture shift and a nationwide learning ecosystem culture that ultimately can move into community-based, countrywide learning ecosystem. So at this point, I'm going to stop again. And what I'd like to ask, I know Geordie has to jump off, so I'm going to actually jump to the last section before I go to our practical section. But what I'd like to do is just ask maybe a minute or two, not long, but for Julie, who's been a partner in this process with me from the outset, to just give her reflections on how she's felt this experimental initiative has evolved over time. And after Julie, just to ask Nadine, who started as a participant in this process, but has become a really valued co-reflective partner, to reflect back on what we've experienced together in the EdEco initiative in the South African space. So Julie, I'm going to hand over to you. And then if you can just hand over to Nadine, and not too long, just a minute or two.
Thanks very much, Robin. And if I could just step back to what James was talking about in his previous presentation, we had conducted some research, when the EQ program was introduced, and the importance of a rich ecosystem to support the kind of learning and change we wanted to see in the education system sort of came to the fore. And it was the thought at that point was, what could we do to actually build this sort of rich learning ecosystem? And at that point, I had engaged with Robin, and we had the global ULab was sort of, running a sort of a ULab process. And we were fortunate enough to be able to use some of their curriculum and methodology and invite a number of our South African partners. And it was sort of experimental, as Robin said in the beginning. It was just, we knew we wanted to do this, and we used this wonderful curriculum and methodology. And the results for me were quite surprising, in that we really got together a group of people to engage on issues, of importance to education, but where they stepped out of their sort of their organizational spaces and really got to, sort of get their teeth into issues that were important to education. and sort of started forming sort of organic relationships. So I think for me, it's been an incredibly useful process, and I still see it as developmental. As Robin said, we sort of right at the beginning, we still, we've started this process, we've got a lot of people who are involved, but we'd like to move it towards a movement, and it's been a surprising result to me. Yeah, very useful methodology. Thanks, Robin, and I'll pass over to Nadine.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, maybe I'll just say a little bit about my experience of the EdEco process over the last just over a year that I've been involved in it. And what I'd like to say a little bit about is I don't want to call it expectation or even desire, but just my kind of feel for its potential. And that's just my personal opinion. It might not be something that's owned by anyone. So I'm really speaking on behalf of myself and not anyone else. But what really has been at the heart of the work that we've been doing together has not been about structures, has not been about curriculum, even though James has gone into quite a bit of depth around the entrepreneurial skills development work and what we're thinking of. We actually hardly ever have spoken about that in our sessions. What we have invested energy in is building relationships between us and within the systems that we work in. So what has kind of been at the core have been words that have resonated for me include trust and relationship and connection, and I think more than anything, vulnerability. There has been, and I think I mentioned this in one of our sessions, was finding a way or helping people who work in education to find a way to own their vulnerability and actually see that as a strength. And I think in our many conversations, that's what we've been able to achieve. It has been in a small space. It has been with a small number of people, a small number of organizations. We're not shaking the world yet, but we are shaking ourselves inside of ourselves. And that, I think, is where the hard work needs to happen first before you can go out and change curricula and assessment processes and that kind of thing. So there's a very powerful co-thinking, co-reflection theme that runs through all of our conversations. So we meet on a weekly basis. It's always virtual because we've come from all over the country. But we just create opportunities to share who we are and what we do and what excites us about education and what troubles us about education. But there's a very deep sense of openness, of trust, and like I said, of vulnerability. And what that leads to for me is the potential. So that's my experience of the EdEco group, and what I believe it opens up potential for is the potential for collaboration. Because in all of my work in education over many, many years, I'm a systems thinker at heart, and I've always wanted and wanted to push for collaboration. I really have grown to believe that collaboration relies on connection. So I feel as if that's what we're doing. We're doing that kind of connection work first before we can talk to how do we break down silos, how do we get different departments to work across interdisciplinary work. You know, all these phrases have been around in the sector for decades, if not centuries. But we've been talking the talk and not realizing that we need to walk the walk. And so the walk that we're walking in the EdEco group is to say, until we build relationships and have trust, actually collaboration is going to be a thwarted initiative. It just won't work. It'll end before it even starts. So yeah, that's just my thinking about how it is that we've worked together over the last year. We're doing small bits, but we, I think, are doing very powerful work. And thanks. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Nadine. That is just such a remarkable reflection. I think it goes back to that comment that I think what we are doing in this space is paying attention to our interior condition, and paying attention to our interior condition collectively, and learning how to be vulnerable together and do that. And my belief certainly is sometimes those inward movements actually have the potential to shift things enormously. And I hope that we see that borne out over time. So what I'm going to do quickly is I'm just going to skip a little bit towards the last section of what we're going to talk about, because I do want Geordie to be able to talk a little bit about the work that's happening in the ed eco space. So just conceptually, firstly, when we think about what does a learning ecosystem mean? So my kind of coming to the learning ecosystem was through the collaboration framework. I'm extremely interested in understanding, how do we collaborate? How do we collaborate well? How do we collaborate better? What does it mean? What does it feel like? How do we collaborate not for the sake of specific projects? So not I'm collaborating with you to get what I want done, but how do we genuinely actually start to work together? And that really was what brought me to this concept of learning ecosystem, the organicity of we work together systemically, not on particular projects, but really paying attention to what is happening within the system, being conscious and aware of the unspoken connections, paying attention to those in order to allow us to collaborate more deeply. And something that I found very helpful is this framework around understanding what collaboration means, because it's a huge word and we often think we're talking about the same thing because we're using the same word, but we're really not. Collaboration is one of those words that's been overused and therefore has become a little bit husked. And so I quite like this framework, which is something that helps us understand that there are multiple different levels and ways of engaging with one another. And the more powerful our engagement, the more powerful and significant our ability to work together, to move even past collaboration, to move into co-creation and convergence, the deeper the investment has to be, the deeper the risk, but also the deeper the benefit. And to allow for that level of risk investment to get to the benefit, what we need to do is become vulnerable, and we need to develop more trust in each other. And so we need to create conditions that allow us to access those levels of trust and vulnerability, to move from just contact, knowing who's out there, towards maybe cooperation, coordinating our stuff a little bit with each other, maybe towards a bit of more collaborative work, and then to truly move into a co-creative convergent space. And so the exercise we're going to do today is really just to look at the very first of those steps. But part of me looking at those steps, and I'm going to skip past this a little bit, is to help us to shift our mental frameworks from this very hierarchical approach into something that allows for the beginning of learning ecosystems, which is network formation and understanding how we convert this. Most education systems have a very hierarchical structure. How do we start to convert that, flatten that a little bit, and shift that to look at our ties, look at the connections in our systems, start to appreciate the relationality of those connections, not just the reporting lines. And that allows us to move past very rigid structures and into more organic, networked, agile structures where we recognize that it's not only the nodes and the reporting lines that matter, but the flexibility and the relationality of those actors within the system. And so we're going to do a little bit of work on that just now. You know, there are a lot of ways of attending to how do we paying attention to what those nodes look like, what the connections between them look like, and to starting to visualize those. And as we visualize them and pay attention to them, shift how they are working. I'm just going to move past here and come back to it. Actually, let me stop this. Let me stop this quickly. Sorry. and I'm just going to pull the whole lot across to your section, Geordie, which is really, you know, having thought about how do we do this process of, conceptually shifting from a hierarchical structure into a networked structure. How do we expand beyond those individual networks and start looking at learning ecosystems and what learning ecosystems mean? So, okay, so looking at individual school systems, which might look like that, they're quite simple, starting to really expand beyond that. Sorry, I haven't got it shared here. Sorry, I was looking at my own screen, not yours. So looking from an individual school system and then starting to expand our framework of reference beyond the networks that apply to individual schools, starting to look at a community level, how communities can be networked in the same way, and how through paying attention to those networks, we really start to see the bigger picture of what resources we are able to pull in and bring to bear upon the education of young people. And then beyond that, starting to look beyond just our community networks and pay attention to the connections that exist in whole countries and ultimately globally. And that is the work that we are starting to do through the NetEdu project, is to look at this from a global systems level. And instead of just knowing who our friends are and who our friends' friends are, we start to be able to peer beyond our own social horizons, what's possible in our own sort of limited network. And when we pay attention to the connections beyond our network, we create pathways to access the resources that lie outside of our fairly constrained hierarchical current education frameworks. So Geordie, if I can please ask you just to speak a little bit, I know you have to run, but just to speak a little bit around what is happening in terms of the NetEdu project and the learning ecosystem tool that is under development, and what is happening in that in terms of expanding the horizons of possibility for what a learning ecosystem can bring to education.
Yes, thank you very much, Robin. So I'm happy to be here with you, everyone. And I'm sorry that I have to leave, so I really have to move on quickly. So, but I would say let me connect a little bit the great and super work that you shared, the eCube team, and so as we have seen, so the learning ecosystem approach is quite. So the approach of change that we are embracing is quite ambitious, and it runs from the inner change, right? So we are going deep into the changes, as Nadine was sharing. I thought it was amazing. So the impact of the work that you're doing is so deep, and it's so crucial for us to transform the way that we are approaching into learning challenges today, right? So, and the only way to expand these changes is supporting people to live this experience that Nadine has experienced. So there's no way that we're gonna be changing the system in a magical way, right? So the way that we think in the NetEdu is we ask ourselves, how can we support people within the system, within the learning system, from the different levels, from school to communities to regional stakeholders, how can they experience a process where they can sense the meaning and the depth of truth, collaboration, and exchange, and this human approach to sharing multiple resources and co-creating and also humanizing our relationships. So this is such a relevant challenge, and the way that we are facing this in the NetEdu project is we ask ourselves, how can we accelerate this change? And we have a few, we have been developing a few projects. So I would say very quickly, one of the ways, what we are doing actually is we are co-creating some tools that support these type of processes and that support the acceleration of these systemic changes, and that accelerate the evolution and development of learning ecosystems in the different levels, in the school level, community, and regional. So tools that are very well sit in a process that is willing to expand the power of collaboration and cross-sectoral dialogues, interdisciplinary collaboration, and so on. So we came out with this idea, we saw that this was a very, very international evidence. We saw that we needed to support schools to move from a very siloed individual perspective, to move out of their boxes and think about relationships in a very different way. So this is how we came up with the school we were told, that also Robin is leading in South Africa. And we're doing very, very interesting work in 17 countries with schools, supporting them to think about themselves as a learning ecosystem, taking into account relationships within school stakeholders, how parents relate to teachers, how students relate to other students, how teachers relate to students, and to rethink relationships in a regenerative way in order to expand the learning opportunities for everyone and to create the conditions for the growth of everyone within the system. So this is one thing. Unlocking schools is essential, is a very, very, very critical point in the ecosystem to expand change. So this is first project. The second one is that what Robin wants me to share more deeply is the UNESCO work that we're doing. That we are looking at another level in the system that is very, very relevant to be supported. That is the regional level, how national and regional stakeholders interact and work together. So we know that education and learning is not anymore the business of educational ministers or educational organization, enterprises, government, administration, and so on. So we know that there are other influencers that are so powerful and that really influence the way that policy runs and the way that policy is implemented in the whole system. As we know that children and young people are highly influenced by other actors beyond the educational system, technological actors, media actors, health actors, business, other administrations, and so on. So, and we know that. So the idea behind the UNESCO tool is to support and visualize these regional stakeholders beyond the educational ministers, and not only visualize those stakeholders, but also better interconnect them by leading a process where we get together with these stakeholders and we share and co-create the narrative, and we support them to inform a different type of policy that is not owned by the educational sector. So a policy that is run and co-created by the whole ecosystem in terms of all the stakeholders that form the ecosystem, and not only the actors, not only the stakeholders, but also their relationships. So we're trying to support them to visualize, to get together, to know themselves, and also to start mapping stakeholders and relationships and other energies that are driving and also restricting the learning ecosystem growth. So we have done quite an intense work actually in Ghana, and I know that Robin can share a lot more around this work that we're actually doing. We're working together with a team in Ghana. They are part of the NetEdu team, but they are leading the process in the ground. They are doing some collaborative work in different regions, doing like consultations is how they call it, with all these interdisciplinary stakeholders. They are trying to support them in order to rethink and to collaborate in order to provide a different approach to how policies have been being designed and implemented in the country. So Robin, this is a little bit around the tool, so you can expand that. And I'm very sorry to say that I have to jump
No problem. Thank you, Geordie. Really appreciated your being here and just your contribution there. So also, you know, sorry, I had the slides going in the background because they were very much talking to what you were talking to, and just so that we had a little bit of visibility of that as well. And Geordie, thank you. Best of luck for the rest of your afternoon.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I'm very happy. I will be very happy to follow this conversation, and I'm very eager also to know more about eCube and the work that you're doing in South Africa. So thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, Geordie. Cheers then. Yeah, so just, you know, just in terms of this learning ecosystem tool, really with a model that is designed on understanding how the ecosystem works, and also the appreciation of the fact that it's not all in a single direction. We need to place our intention on attending to the bonds and the connections, the trust, the levels of relationality, understanding the in-betweenness that's happening within the system, but also recognizing that there are forces that can disrupt that. So being quite agile and quite forgiving and quite attentive to how the human beings are operating within the system, rather than just the outcomes of what we want to see achieved by a learning ecosystem framework. And you'll see, you know, just harking back to the initial video that I shared with you, that this really is, in terms of thinking about a learning ecosystem approach, it's a complex approach, it's a systems approach, and it's dynamic. And so in building this tool, really needing to pay attention to the dynamism of the system, and to where we look at what are the things that we seek to grow. What are the things? So firstly, growing our awareness of who is in the system. That's a simple mapping exercise, but far beyond the mapping. So much of what I think we think about as a learning ecosystem is just the mapping, but far beyond the mapping, really starting to look at what is the relationality, what is the dynamic within that system? Is it a healthy dynamic? So you can have learning ecosystems present that are very unhealthy, but if we attend to the health of those systems, to the relationality, to the quality of the relationships within the system, hopefully what we will see over time is increasing evolution from an emergent network to a young network, and, you know, to a mature network and a climax network. And what's exciting, I think, in the presentation that we've done today, is to be able to combine this conceptual framework with our South African experience. And our South African experience is really that of an emergence. It's really early, really, really early, but there is a plan. And to try and fit this into a longer term plan about attending to the growth of genuine learning ecosystem. So I think we are actually, unfortunately, I thought we had 90 minutes, but we only have 60. I think we are at the end of our time. There was a practical exercise which I will share, and Madalena, I can share with you if you like the full slide pack. It's very easy to follow. For those of you who'd be keen to just start to think about this in your own contexts. It's a very simple practical exercise, starting where you are. So it's one thing that's very daunting to think about a national level learning ecosystem. It's extraordinarily daunting. But where we can start, where we are, and starting to pay attention in our own networks to who's there. What are the relationships? Who are the brokers? Who are the connectors? Who are the trust builders? These are not things we pay attention to often when we focused on an outcomes orientation or a pure project-based orientation, but they are so critical in terms of the health of the network. And so the exercise I was going to do with you was really just a reshift and a refocus. I'll share those with Madalena, and she can share them with everybody who's here. And maybe just now, before we close off, perhaps if you can just give us 5 minutes just to reflect briefly back on what you've heard, and on what resonates for you or what interests you. So if I can just open up, and if we can just please hear from from ourselves as a group that's been present here? What is it that's interested you? Just pop your hand up to share your comments. Okay. Anything that's struck you or been of interest? Debbie, I'm not sure what you made a note on the video earlier on, but anything that sort of stood out for you in the conversation?
I think one is just the diversity of all the things that are happening and all the opportunities for us to connect and learn from each other, and why the piece of the collaboration is so important, that we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel. So in our breakout room, I learned something about a project you're doing, Robin, and I'll be following up with that. And it just makes me laugh because it's like, oh, but we're doing something similar. So it'll be fun to collaborate and to learn from one another.
Yeah, fantastic, Debbie. And I think this is the thing. So, I mean, there's a fundamental shift that needs to happen around generosity of heart and spirit, being interested and excited about what's happening elsewhere, being able to connect those things without needing to own them, being able and willing to learn from each other, and just stepping into this building momentum around the concept of the learning ecosystem. There are so many nascent spots developing, and there will not ever be one entity that develops something, whether it be for a community or a country. There really has to be this attention to the trust of saying, oh, you're doing something too, that's amazing. I don't need to own it, I don't even need to participate in it, but the fact that I know and I can connect you on, or I can draw on you for strength, really supports the work I'm doing in my own space. Gary, any thoughts from you? Nix, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that what struck me is that quote that you said about the success of the intervention lies the interior condition. And then later on, you talked about how the human being, we look at how the human being is operating in the system and that intent. And I think that as a participant of your weekly sessions, that's exactly what's happening, is we're starting to look at our own interior conditions, but then at the same time, seeing what the system's got to say. So just endorsing what you're doing, and thank you.
Thanks, Nix. Gary, you had unmuted as well.
No, and ditto from me. I mean, I think you know that this is what I think's been missing in this space forever, and that I wish this could get more visibility than it does. I wish more people could be doing this to really dig deep into each of us and how we connect and how much deeper we can go. I always think we look too much at externalities in every single thing we do, and so congratulations. Carry on with the work, and may it spread all over for you.
It's happening in lots of spaces, I think, which is really exciting. And it's uncertain. It's uncertain work. It's very different. So it's not outcomes-based work. So it doesn't easily fit. But my belief is, anyway, it kind of is the foundation of a different kind of outcome. So hopefully in time, we'll see a different kind of outcome emerging. Christina, Dudu, lovely to see you, Duduki, Madalena, Solomon, any last thoughts from you before we close off? And I do apologize around the mistiming of the session.
Thanks, Robin. I think for me, participating in those Friday calls always just highlights the amount of work that's happening in the system and the amount of similar things that some of us are doing, and the ability to connect with each other outside of our own projects, and just to lean into a space where you can almost take a deep breath and say, sure, this is what's happening in my space. And for people to help you unpack and to reflect back what you're feeling, and then help you to get over what you're feeling, to get on to do what you need to do. So the times that I've connected, I'm always amazed at just how we can get together as people in the sector and just to breathe and to listen to each other and to help each other understand where we're coming from. Recently, I posted something and I was very impressed with the number of people that responded, that I've been able to connect with outside of the system to say, I had a thought, I'm looking to go deeper into a particular space, and was actually pleasantly surprised that people responded. And I've been able to connect with people to say, this is how you could think about it. This is how I've done it in my space. And those situations have been very helpful. So I've benefited. I'm a beneficiary of that space. And yeah, thanks to eCubed and you, Robin, who always looks fresh at 7:30 in the morning. I don't know how you do it.
With COVID.
So yeah, thanks, Robin.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Solomon, thank you so much for being with us. I don't know if you'd like to just unmute and pop your videos on, everybody, and we can just say cheers to each other.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks so much,
for
everybody.
joining.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Robin.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Solomon, it's been lovely to meet you. I hope we meet again. If you're on LinkedIn, won't you just connect with me? I can't connect anymore because I'm out of my free resources, but if you can connect, it would be lovely. I'd love to invite you to some of our Africa Voices dialogue sessions. I'd be really interested in your perspective.
Thank you. If I could have the link to connect with you, that would be great. I'll show them.
All right. What I'm going to do, I'm going to type my email address if that's okay. Actually, and then I'll go and look for this as well quickly. I do have it here, and I'll get you a LinkedIn address.
All right.
Hold on a second. All right, here comes my LinkedIn one. I have to ask you because I've got COVID. I'm quite sick. So
I'm so sorry.
I hope that wasn't confusing. It felt very confusing for me.
Okay.
All right.
Sorry
Okie dokie. No, it's no problem. It's all good. It's just one of those where you like your brain is not necessarily working at the same speed as everything else is.
Yeah. I feel so happy connecting today, joining into the conversation, even though I joined in late and some of the conversation I could not participate much. We are a very young organization, but we are still learning. And I believe in our own little way, we're making a great impact through our after-school support program, mobile library projects.
Yeah.
Yes. Our Facebook, our website is currently under development, but I could share a Facebook link with you.
Okay,
to see some of the activities that we have going on. Then I could share more information with you when I connect with you on LinkedIn.
That'll be wonderful. Thank you.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Keep well.
Thank you, Robbie.
Cheers,
it's a pleasure meeting you. Thank you.
You too.
Bye.
Bye then.
Bye.